Welcome to episode 353 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Phillip Partin and Lubbock police detective Derick Smith. They review an abduction case where the subject threatened to expose explicit photos of a 14-year-old teen and harm her family, coercing her to leave Texas and travel to Michigan with him. The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, CAST, was called in to assist with the case. By tracking their phones, the unknown male abductor was identified and captured, and the teen was recovered and returned home to her family. Phil and Derick worked on this case with Detective John Bentley. Phil Partin served in the FBI for 24 years. His first assignment was to the Atlanta Division, where he worked on a gang squad and served on the SWAT team. In 2004, he was transferred to El Paso to the Midland Resident Agency, where he formed the Safe Streets Task Force and served as its coordinator. Later in his career, he was appointed as a supervisory special agent for the Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal at the Criminal Justice Information Services in West Virginia, CJIS. He became the unit chief of the CJIS Division's intelligence group. In 2015, Phil was appointed to the Lubbock RA in the Dallas Division, where he formed and supervised the Innocent Images Task Force. Since his retirement, Phil is an administrator for the Texas Anti-Gang Center in Lubbock, Texas. Derick Smith is a 12-year veteran of the Lubbock Police Department. He was promoted to the rank of detective in 2019. His first assignment was to the Special Victims Unit, where he primarily investigated domestic violence cases. He was transferred to the Crimes Against Children Squad in January of 2021. He currently serves as a member of the Lubbock Police Department Internet Crimes Against Children Investigations Unit, ICAC, and the Dallas ICAC Task Force, and is a former task force officer of the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children's Task Force. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to remind everyone that I sent out my May Reader Team email. So if you're a member of my Reader Team, look for it in your inbox, and if it's not there, check your spam filter or promotions tab. In this issue, I updated my review of the Netflix series Mindhunter. Please mark your calendar for May 15th, the premiere for the new J.J. Abrams and LaToya Morgan FBI TV series, Duster. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI in books, TV, and movies, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Phil Partin and Detective Derick Smith from the Lubbock Police Department. Hi guys, how are you?
We're doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I love these episodes where I have a retired agent and one of our law enforcement partners talking about a case that the FBI and that particular law enforcement agency work together, because it helps to dismiss all of those bad movie myths about the FBI not working well with others. This particular case that we're going to talk about today was worked off of a task force focused on crimes against children. Is that right, Phil?
Yes, ma'am, it is. I was assigned as a supervisor for the Lubbock Resident Agency out of the Dallas Division. When I came out here, I realized that we had a gap and we needed more of a focus on the crimes against children. So I met with the Lubbock Chief of Police, and he assigned a full-time task force agent to the FBI almost immediately after I got here in 2015.
All right, so this particular case was one of the last ones that you worked before you retired.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. This case was in 2020, and I retired in 2021.
Where do you want to start? Who wants to start?
I'll go to Derick almost immediately. Derick was one that came in on this case before the FBI, and Derick called the FBI. But I'll let him tell you kind of how the case started. That way we get it in chronological order.
This particular case happens in November of 2020. As we all can remember, whether we want to or not, our 2020 year of our life, where we were in the 2 weeks to flatten the curve and everybody got to stay home for 2 weeks and COVID just kept coming around. And so this case starts as an internet case and then progresses into an abduction of a child. Like most good law enforcement shows start off, this case starts on Friday, November 13th of 2020, where our victim in the case goes to school. It's a normal day for her at school. About the only abnormal thing on that date was when we would later talk to her family. She was much more chipper than normal, had gotten up without much prodding, anything like that, and was off to her day. She goes to school. It's a relatively normal day at school. And in the last period of the school day, she skips out of class. She asks the teacher to go to the bathroom, goes to the bathroom for almost the entire class period. And then at the end of the day, her sister, who also attended the same school that she went to, gets on the bus, expecting to see our victim get on the bus as well. And before the bus drives away, she realizes that sister's not on the bus. That's where normal Friday the 13th really starts from there. Is our victim is supposed to be on the bus to ride home, and she doesn't get on the bus. That kind of starts a series of events where we have the sister quickly notify the bus driver, hey, my sister's not on the bus. She gets off the bus quickly, tells the principal of the school that they attended. And just for ages, both of these girls are in middle school at the time. She tells the principal of the middle school, hey, my sister's not on the bus. I don't know where she's at. And then realizes that she doesn't have her cell phone to be able to contact her parents. So she jumps back on the bus, takes the bus home, and then gets off of the bus and runs in and tells her dad, sister didn't get on the bus and I don't know where she's at. So the timeline there is we've got the end of the school day. It takes about an hour for the bus to get back to the house. And then once she gets back to the house, she tells her dad that our victim is not there, and they immediately go to the school. When dad and sister get back to the school, they talk with the principal who's already watched the video of the day. That's who we were able to determine had seen her go into the bathroom. He's got cameras in the school that showed her going into the restroom, not coming out of there until the end of when the school bell rings. He had found a video of her walking along the bus line where all the buses line up, but she keeps walking past the buses. So where we are in Lubbock, Texas, we're very far west in the state. We're the largest department west of Dallas, west of the Metroplex, and we're about 5 hours from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we're the biggest department between Dallas and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our area of Texas is very rural. We're a densely populated city, but we're spread out over a large number of square miles. And this school was built for future growth. The area around the school is mostly cotton fields at this point in time. The closest structure that we had to the school that was not a school-related building was 850 feet. And it was a dilapidated warehouse. There was nothing anywhere near that had any kind of cameras or anything like that. So the school cameras pick our victim up walking down that bus line, and then she turns and walks off of camera. And we don't have any other footage from there. Dad goes with sister. They talk with the principal. They leave there. They go check most of the normal hangout spots where our victim was known to go hang out with her friends. Again, we're a very rural area, especially this part of town. So there's an area called the Pit, which is just a big dug hole in the ground where kids will hang out from time to time. They check that. They check the mall. They go several places. And they don't find her in any of her normal hangout spots. So they return home and contact the Lubbock Police Department and start the reporting process. And at that point in time, there was not a lot of information. And so the report is put in as a runaway. With this particular case, this is now a Friday afternoon, Friday the 13th. We all know police reports come in and are immediately assigned to a detective on Friday afternoon. In reality, that's not the case. And so the report is made by a patrol officer. The officer goes out, takes the information that we have available to us at that point in time. He makes the report. It's sent to his supervisor. At that point in time, there was no information that we had that would warrant calling in the cavalry on this case. In Lubbock, we're a population of about 270,000 people, depending on when colleges are in place and stuff like that. We normally have somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 runaways on the weekends. They go do whatever the runaways do on the weekends, and by Sunday, they're coming home. The information that we had, that's kind of the direction that this case was put at that point in time. So the case goes into the runaway queue, and at that point in time in my career, I was a relatively new detective. I had been in investigations about a year and a half at that point, and I was assigned to the domestic violence squad. This particular case goes into the queue where my supervisor at the time is assigned the juvenile offender units and domestic violence unit. I'm working in domestic violence, and he comes in on Monday morning and gets his case queued, sees this particular case. So now we've gone through the weekend. We've had no contact from the victim. She hasn't posted to any of her social media or anything like that. Her dad is very much wanting to have answers about where his daughter is gone and what we're doing at that point in time. So he's in communication with my supervisor, trying to make sure that we're working on the case. My supervisor takes a look at it. At that point in time, the juvenile runaway section had a civilian that handled all of the runaway cases, and we had a sworn officer that handled any criminal cases that were committed by juveniles. In this perfect storm of a situation that we had found ourselves in at that point in time, our civilian had just retired from the police department. We were in the process of hiring a new civilian to handle the runaway cases, and the criminal investigator had just promoted to a supervisor role. My sergeant found himself in a situation where he's the one that's having to look at this and see what information has developed over the weekend and where it needs to go from there. He starts taking a look at the case, trying to talk with other witnesses and people that he can gain information from, people that may have seen her leaving the schools and things like that. And at that point in time, some information had been posted online. And so there were a lot of people calling and giving possible sightings at the mall and things like that. So he's running down all of those leads at that point in time. This is during COVID. We had gone to a skeleton staff in the office. So we had half of our investigators that were set to work from home status, that if there was to be an outbreak in the office, that we would still be able to have detectives that we could call in. And the other half of us was still working in the office every day, coming in, doing our normal jobs from the office. I lovingly refer to that time of investigations as the we need a favor time. Because when there's half as many people in the office, you get twice as many favors that you're asked to complete. My lieutenant comes walking by. This is now Wednesday, and he comes walking by and he says, "Hey, I need a favor. What can I do for you, sir?" The conversation quickly goes to, "Well, we have this report of a runaway." And I said, "I work domestic violence. I didn't know that fell under domestic violence, but I'd be happy to take a look at it." So he assigns me this case for further investigation. So the first thing I did was I jumped into the reports. And by that point in time, with over the weekend, a lot of the reports that had come in based on things being put on Facebook and other social media sites, there had been several additional reports written to the original report. So I start going through those reports then to see if there's any new information that I can gain to start helping me further my investigation. Looking through all of that stuff there, trying to see if there's any new information. The next thing I did was I went ahead and got online myself and go to Facebook. It's probably one of the best law enforcement investigative tools that's ever been created because everybody puts everything on social media these days.
Yeah, isn't that nice? When I was coming up years ago, we didn't have that, but it is the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. Everybody's very willing to air their dirty laundry on Facebook and post things that in previous times we wouldn't have told the people living next door, but we'll tell everybody on the internet these days. In that time, I'm able to figure out that the family had been contacted by a group that tries to help find kids. And they're a group of civilians that come into town and try and help locate these kids. And they're groups that I think at their heart, they really try to do their best when it comes to finding these kids. But all too often, these groups come in and create more damage in their wake because the information they're sharing, they kind of tend to smear law enforcement, what law enforcement's actually doing or not actually doing. This group had come into town and they had done basically that. You know, they made some social media posts talking about the Lubbock Police Department wasn't doing anything, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, we were 3 days, really 3 full days into that investigation at that point in time. But one of the things that we did learn from that was that the victim's biological mother had taken one of those flyers that was made, and she changed the phone number from the Lubbock Police Department's phone number to her own personal phone number. And when she did that, she started getting a bunch of calls, and none of them were going to end up being related to anybody that had any knowledge about what had happened to our victim. And so now we've got another wrinkle in our investigation where we're having to wade through these calls and everything to try and figure out what exactly could possibly be related and what's not going to be related. So that takes us through Wednesday night. And then Thursday morning, I schedule a follow-up interview with our victim's dad. And so he comes in early Thursday morning. We sit down and just start talking. And I just ask him, talk to me about the last few months. What has kind of gone on? Where are things at? And so he starts telling me that a few months prior in the June or July time period, they had been at home, everybody in the family sitting on the couch, and they get a knock at the door. And it ends up being an investigator from CPS or Child Protective Services, and they want to know about a possible child abduction involving our victim. The dad's really kind of surprised. He's like, there's been no child abduction. She's sitting on the couch right next to me. So they find that this is a false report made to Child Protective Services.
Let me ask you, you said that was in June, and when did this actual abduction occur?
Yeah, so the actual abduction occurs in November. So we're several months prior to November at this point in time when this first involvement with Child Protective Services happens. So the dad's very confused by that. And there had been some other things going on in the house at that point in time. And so based on the totality of the circumstances, dad makes the decision at that point in time that he's going to take away all of the electronics. And he also moves the two sisters into the same bedroom. And the intent there is that the younger sister can kind of be his eyes in the room. And if there's something that he needs to be aware of, that she would bring those things to him. So when he comes to that interview, he brings a couple of things that he had located during that time period. One of them being a Chromebook. Another one was the victim's cell phone that she had during that June or July time period. And then there was a couple of journals and things like that he brought in that he thought might be beneficial for us to take a look at. And in talking with him, he had had a couple of days to really focus on what was going on at that point and was outside of that window of the sheer shock and panic that his daughter was now missing. And he said, one of the things I did over the weekend was I went through a room just seeing what was and what wasn't there. And there were several things that she had taken with her, a bottle of perfume, a couple of gift cards that she had gotten. But the one thing that he really keyed in on was that her baby blanket was missing. He said, this is a baby blanket that she's had from the time she was in the hospital. She takes this thing everywhere with her. And he said, when I saw that baby blanket was missing, I knew that my little girl wasn't coming home. So just being a domestic violence investigator and sitting and talking with him and kind of the weight of the statements that he was making, I really knew at that point, we've got to get something done here. So he brings us all these devices. For those people that do digital forensics work, they know that a Chromebook is merely an access point. There's really no digital forensics that come off of that. And then a cell phone that is probably 5 to 7 months stale at this point in time. There wasn't a lot of digital forensics that we could get off of those devices that were going to be helpful at that point in time. But one of the things that we opted to do was, knowing that the sister had been living in the same room, we went ahead and had the sister forensically interviewed at a children's advocacy center. And through the course of that interview, we got what I think is our first real big lucky break in this case.
Before you go on to that, there may be people who are listening that don't understand what you were just explaining about a forensic interview of a juvenile. Can we just take a moment for you to explain the necessity of that?
A forensic interview is a trained interviewer who is not law enforcement. They're not even an investigator or anything like that. What they are is a person who has been trained to speak with children. In a forensic interview, kind of the timeline of a forensic interview is the child will come into a room. It's called a soft interview room. There's normally big comfy chairs and things on the wall and coloring pages and things like that. Just an environment to try and make the child comfortable. And then the interview starts with a rapport building phase. They will talk with the child about anything but the reason that they're there for the interview. The weather outside, school, sports, anything that they're interested in, all of those things. And they build this rapport with the child to get the child comfortable talking. Then they'll go through another phase called truth versus lie, where they make sure that the child's aware of what it means to tell the truth, what it means to tell a lie. They'll go through consequences of what happens if you tell a lie, things like that, just to make sure that the child understands the difference between the two. And then they have them agree that you promise everything you tell me today is going to be the truth. And then once they do that, they'll start softly going into that interview. Well, talk to me about your home, who all lives in your home. And then they expand upon that to where they can get a chance to talk with the child and make it as inviting and comfortable of an environment as they can to make sure that child is comfortable talking with them. We find that these are very important because in law enforcement, we want answers and we want them now. So a bunch of officers interviewing kids, it just doesn't go well because we want to get to the point. We don't like to take the long road. We do the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And with kids interviews, that's not the shortest distance. It's the quickest way to shut down a kid from wanting to talk to you. We opted to do the forensic interview with the sister just to see if there was any information that she was able to provide to us from her time sharing a room with her victim. There was a lot of things during that interview that she was able to talk about, but probably where I consider to be her first big break in the case is she had learned that our victim had located a cell phone that had been given to the youngest child in the house to play with. A lot of parents will frequently do that. You've got an old cell phone, you throw it in a drawer, and your kids see us on our cell phones, and they want to do the same thing. And so they'll pull that cell phone out of the drawer, hand it to the kid. It's turned off. It doesn't have cell service. The battery's dead most of the time. And we think it's a safe device to give to our kids. Reality is that if that phone can still be charged, that phone can be connected to Wi-Fi, which almost every house has nowadays. It is as much of an access to the internet and to the outside world as any other cell phone that we have. Our victim had located a cell phone shortly after all the changes that happened in that June or July timeframe. And the sister decided that while she knew that was probably information that she should give to the dad, she kind of used it as information to help our victim become comfortable talking to her about other things. Now, as a parent, you think, golly, that's the exact reason I put you into that room. Why didn't you tell me about it? What ultimately ended up happening was the best thing that could have happened in this case. It worked. Our victim was comfortable with her sister knowing that she had a phone to the point that she shared her email and passwords to all of her accounts with the younger sister. So now if you think back to that Chromebook that we have that's just an access point to the internet with no forensic information on it, it now becomes the keys to the entire investigation because the sister had the password. Now that we have that password that we're able to get from that forensic interview, now we can get onto the Chromebook and we're able to get into the social media accounts that our victim had been using up until the time that she was abducted. The first thing I find, and we had some information that she was very active on the Discord platform, which for people that aren't familiar with Discord was originally started to be a chat and streaming service for gamers. People that play video games can jump on there. They can start a stream where people can watch them playing a video game and they can interact with those people. There's chat portions where they can communicate. And that was its original purpose. But it quickly just became another way for people to communicate. They were communicating through that Discord application. And so once I'm into her Discord account, I find the last conversation that she had had prior to the abduction. And when we look at that conversation, it perfectly aligns with Friday the 13th, where our victim has this phone with her, or has the ability to communicate on another device that she had at school. The device is connected to Wi-Fi, and she's communicating with who would ultimately become her abductor and telling him, hey, I'm in class. This is when the school period ends, and they're communicating back and forth. And the last message she sends is, okay, I'm headed out now. The time is almost identical to when you see her on film walking out of the bathroom. And that's the last communication we had. And so now I know that this particular chat message that I have is the most important thing in our investigation to figuring out who has our victim and where they might be. So start going through this messaging group, this chat, and it is months long. We see that it goes back to that July, August time period of communication. And the communications that are sent from our suspect are just terrible messages to this girl. Very belittling, very violent, very sexually based messages that he's sending to her over this time period. And what we would eventually find was that there was a previous communication where they had started off of a common interest type thing, and the conversation quickly goes to a sexual based conversation that this guy's having with her, to the point where she decides she doesn't want to talk to him anymore because the conversation really goes a direction that she's not comfortable with. But a problem that she ultimately decided was something that she couldn't stop communicating with him was that she had sent him sexually explicit images of herself. And so she felt that she could not break that communication for fear that he would share those images. And in fact, some of the messages that he had were him saying, "Don't forget who has your pictures and what I can do with them."
This was really what we're hearing about today with the sextortion.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. Like I said, the initial conversations from prior to June are conversations where it would almost be like conversations of somebody that you would see in a normal dating relationship. They would talk about what they ate, how their days went, things like that. And then it progresses into that requesting and sending of sexually explicit material, and then violently shifts to a sextortion case involving the internet. So we start combing through this months-long communication to see what we can find. One of the first things we find is a phone number with a 325 area code. And so for those of us in Texas, the 325 area code is the Abilene area. And part of the communication was, I'm about 2 hours away. I know Abilene is right at a 2-hour mark from Lubbock. Finding this phone number and that time distance, I really focused in on that phone number. Ultimately, we would find out that the group of citizens that came in to try and assist with the case was actually given access to these electronic devices before we had them. And they had sent some emails out through her email with their phone number, trying to get people to contact them with any information that they may have. So we spent a little bit of time chasing down this phone number, only to find out that it was one of the people that had been in Lubbock trying to help and not actually her suspect. So we keep diving through these messages, trying to find anything that we can. And at this point, we now know that it's going to be a child abduction. And I am well out of my league at that point in time. I've got about 1.5 years in investigations. I work domestic violence. I don't work child abductions typically. Definitely don't work kid cases most of the time. And so I'm out of my league. The sergeant over the child crimes unit, a good friend of mine, I took a couple of minute break from my desk and I go talk to her, and I'm telling her everything that I've got going on. She looks at me and she says, you can call the FBI for help. Now, I'm a detective at the Lubbock Police Department. At this point in time in my career, I didn't know that we had FBI that sat in Lubbock. And I definitely didn't know that a detective in my shoes had the ability to just call the FBI when I needed help. And so very shocked, very surprised. Me gets that information from her. And immediately I remember, okay, we have a task force officer that does sit with the FBI. And so I called him. His name's John Bentley. We had worked together for a number of years before he went over to the FBI as a task force officer. And I called him and I'm like, John, I need help. And here's what I've got going on. This is now Friday. And John's like, I'm on my way. Say no more. So he gets there and we start going through these messages together. And one of the first things that we find after he gets there is an email address that was sent in the chat when they were trying to play an online game together. The suspect sends our victim this email address, and John looks at me and he goes, that's our first step. That's where we can send a subpoena to get the subscriber information for that. Now, again, on domestic violence, the subpoena process that I know is you send a subpoena to the grand jury. The next time they convene, they look at that subpoena and decide whether or not they're going to grant it. You get it back. It may take a week or two. And I know we don't have that kind of time at this point. We need to work significantly faster than that. John tells me about the process that you can have on child exploitation and exigent circumstances cases where we can get information back almost instantaneously. I tell John, go ahead, help me with this process. Teach me what I don't know.
Whenever Derick called John let me know that he was going to go to the police department and work on a runaway case that was looking more like a kidnapping. So I stayed in contact with him, and he very quickly started sending me admin subpoenas. And for every admin subpoena that we would approve for him, more and more were coming pretty rapidly. And so I knew John was calling me too, and I knew he was getting into something that was going to be pretty intense and long term. And so his partner on the task force is Special Agent Keith Quigley, was out of town. So I went to the Lubbock Police Department with John to be the second agent to help fill in where I could. Being a supervisor didn't hurt at the time either.
And this is about a week now that she's been missing.
We're right at a week at this point in time. We'd gone from Friday the 13th to the following Friday when I'm now contacting the FBI for assistance on this deal. So John helps. He fires off that first round of admin subpoenas for the information related to the subscriber details for that account. And we get that returned back rather quickly. It comes back with a phone number and an area code that I don't recognize. And then there's a recovery email associated with it as well. So we turn around, send off another admin subpoena for the information related to the recovery email. And that comes back again with the same matching phone number and another name that's very closely related to the first recovery email that we got. We take that information and now we've got a phone number that we think might be a workable phone number again. We put that information into a law enforcement database. It comes back that the number is registered out of Michigan. And I've often thought back, like at this point, since this case, was that initial Michigan phone number something that caused me great concern? And I think in today's day and age, it's not uncommon for people to move from one side of the country to the other side and keep their phone number because we move with those phone numbers all the time. So a lot of people, when they do move from one place to another, they keep their phone numbers. And we're also a large college town. So it's not uncommon for people to have area codes that aren't consistent with the Lubbock area when they're living here.
I still have my New Jersey phone number, and I'm now living in North Carolina. Phil, did you want to jump in and add anything at this point?
Yes, ma'am. Whenever we realized that we could be dealing with a person that was in Michigan, that's where I knew the FBI could bring in more resources and that we would wind up playing a bigger part in the case. When I came to the police department, we were working out of a very small office, the three of us, Derick and John and I, and we divided the work very evenly. Derick was talking to the family. John was talking to agents in Michigan, and I was dealing with FBI Dallas and FBI headquarters, trying to get the CAST guys, which is our cell phone analysis team, trying to pull all the resources in to make the case work and we can get something done.
Yeah, so we've got this phone number now and we're working with that. And like Phil was saying, he's trying to pull in some other resource. And that's where John looks at me and he goes, man, we need CAST. And again, I'm new to all of this. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't understand the acronyms. I can remember just making the comment to John going, who's got a broken boat? What do we need CAST for? And it's when he tells me, CAST is the cell phone team, they're great at what they do. And that's where we need to go next. So we call the guys that are in the Dallas office that handle that, explain to them what we've got going on. And I can remember the guy that we're talking on the phone with saying, I'm on my way. And I know he's in Dallas. Like I said earlier, Dallas is about 5 hours from him. And I said, that's a long way to come. Is that normal or can you do what you need to from there? And he goes, no, it's better for me to be on site. I said, all right. As he's driving to Lubbock, he's feeding us information of, okay, we need to get these records from the cell phone company, request this data as well. And he's naming all these different things off that he knows that he needs to do his job. And so we're getting those subpoenas sent off as fast as we can with exigent circumstances, trying to get that data for him as fast as he can. And right about the time he gets into Lubbock is when those emails start finally coming back with the data that we're requesting.
I want to make a note that this is happening all over the weekend. And I think that's one of the things that sharing these case reviews allows everyone to understand, that being in law enforcement, being a police officer, a detective, or an agent is not a 9-to-5 job. This guy got a call on a Friday afternoon, and now he's heading 5 hours away to work on this case.
Well, when I came over, it was early Friday afternoon, and we started pulling resources from Dallas and FBI headquarters. I already knew that it was going to be a long night for all of us, that information was coming in so quickly and at such a rapid pace from the admin subpoenas and from the telephone subpoenas and the CAST information, that volume of information was going to take a lot of time to process and to get disseminated out to the right people, both here and in Michigan, to make sure that we could do something about it. So this case wound up being where we put a lot of hours in a very short period of time between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
So right about the time Cast rolls into Lubbock, we're getting those returns, and he sits down at his computer, gets everything fired up. We give him a place to work out of. He starts loading all that data into his system. And I can remember it being about 5 minutes from the time he sat down to when he says, "Hey, you know that phone number you asked me to look at?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "It was in Lubbock and in the vicinity of the victim's school on the day of the abduction." I said, "Great. What else do we know?" And he said, "That phone's in Michigan now." And that is at the point where my heart sank, because I'm looking at it as a local officer with local jurisdiction going, this girl is 20 hours away from me now. And how did we get to that? Very fortunately, we had already involved the FBI at this point in time. Phil's on the phone with his counterparts in Michigan and trying to get people lined out to get to where this phone is in the area. Now we're getting real-time information about who the owner of the phone is, things like that, and trying to figure out what we might know.
All right, Phil, let me ask you, in the communications between them, he had told her he was 2 hours away. That was a lie.
No, that was the truth. He had driven down here to pick her up, and that was his logical route to get to where we are.
But most of the time when they were communicating, he was in Michigan. He was not from Texas.
Correct. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Whenever Derick was saying that the local police department has issues with reaching out beyond state lines, the FBI is very at home there. So I reached out to the Detroit office, and this phone was located in a resident agency territory, so a satellite office out of Detroit. So I was reaching out to the resident agency, and I found that they didn't have a supervisor there at the time. He had transferred out, and the new one hadn't been incoming. So I was talking to an acting supervisor that probably wasn't used to this type of case. They had to be briefed on a lot of information in a very short period of time. And we were trying to act with an urgency to get them to go a couple hours away to check a house and see if a red car was there that we had from the Lubbock area. We wound up getting them out there. They did see the red car, and I knew it was time to start looking towards a search warrant and getting a search warrant.
Yeah, so we get on the phone with FBI in Michigan, and like Phil was saying, they're a couple hours away. They get their troops rallied together and start heading that direction. As soon as they get to the house, they call us and they're like, "Hey, there's a red car out front." And some of our early information that we had gotten from possible witnesses, they thought they had seen her getting into a red car, but they weren't able to describe if it was an SUV or crossover or car, 2-door, 4-door, nothing like that, just red car. We start working with the information that we've gotten at that point in time, and we're looking at where all that cell phone had been in the Michigan area that it was in around the time. And one of the interesting things to me that I learned through the process was that cell phone towers are intentionally placed around bodies of water because the cell signal will skip across the water and travel a farther distance. So a tower that's closer to a body of water can cover a larger area than a tower that's further inland. We had a lot of places where different towers were picking this phone up because of the strength of the cell signal. And again, all we have is red car, and we're trying to work through that information to figure out how we can definitively say, yes, this is the house that we need to be at. So as we're working through all of that information, the FBI in Michigan is giving us information. We're feeding them information. We're all working together to figure out who's going to take on the process of getting the search warrant and how that's all going to go. And at this point in time, I am well outside of my league. I've got the right people in place to help with this part. So I really stepped back for a little bit and let John and Phil do their work.
So it was about 10 o'clock at night whenever the FBI agents in Michigan told us that a red car was there. We combined that with the cell phone analysis information, putting the subject's phone in the location where the red car was. So I talked to Michigan about we'd get them the information to get a search warrant, and they wanted us to write the search warrant. Well, you can only write a search warrant for property in your territory. Other than that, you have to get an extraterritorial warrant. There's a lot to it. Ultimately, is what happened was they kept surveillance on the house. They could see lights on and off in the house. They knew the house was occupied. What we did here in Lubbock is John and I typed the search warrant. I think we got the search warrant back to Michigan at about 2 o'clock in the morning. We sent that to them, and I'd contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office here, the criminal chief, and asked them to reach out to their counterparts in Michigan to let them know this was happening. And I'd done that earlier in the evening, so everybody was supposed to be working the same direction in the same way. When Michigan got the warrant, They had an affiant there, give it to their prosecutor, their U.S. Attorney's Office, who approved it. And then they got it to their judge early in the morning on Sunday. The judge signed it around 7 o'clock in the morning. And then the RA didn't have a SWAT team immediately accessible to him from the FBI. So they called the state police. Michigan State Police provided a SWAT team, and they went into the house about 8 o'clock in the morning. They found the victim in there, and they found the subject in there, and they arrested the subject, and they were able to rescue the victim. Hearing all what had happened in the house, what the subject did to that victim while she was in his company, he held her down on a bed, and he removed her braces with a pair of pliers.
Oh, my goodness.
And so it was very brutal. We had a real urgency to try to get her out as quickly as we could. I thought the FBI did a good job of pulling together resources and pulling together assets, whether it's state, local, and federal, and getting this girl out of that house.
You, of course, found out about the braces after she was rescued.
Yes, ma'am, that's exactly true.
Let me ask you about the family, because I think a lot of people would be wondering how much information you are relaying back to them, how much they know about what's going on. Because as you both mentioned, the thought was nothing's happening. Law enforcement isn't acting fast enough. How much are they aware of what's going on over this weekend?
Initially, they knew that we were looking at somebody in Michigan with their daughter. And so we kept them up to date with that. Then we also let them know that their daughter had been rescued. We didn't immediately tell them of all the violence and all the occurrences in the house because you have to time those things to deliver them appropriately. And Derick did a fantastic job of interaction with the family and keeping them updated with the information they needed as they needed it.
And what were you told about, you're talking about her physical condition, the fact that she had had those braces removed, which I can understand how painful that must have been. What about her emotional state? Did anybody relay back to you how she reacted when the SWAT team from Michigan State Police came in?
I know that she was mobile under her own power, but as far as her mental state, I knew that this is traumatizing and crushing for a person of any age, of any sex. Our hearts went out to her, and we knew here that we're dealing with a very, very delicate situation, that there was going to be a lot of time for this to process and to start healing for both the victim and the family.
And Derick, I take it you were the one who was in contact with the family, with the father, when she was rescued. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as Phil was talking about, that process went on all through Saturday night, trying to get that search warrant written, get it over to the family and everything. I had really dug in on this deal at that point in time, and I was obviously very invested in the investigation. I can remember sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, early Sunday morning, John telling me, Derick, you got to go home and get some sleep. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not leaving. And he had been keeping tabs on me. And he's like, dude, you've been home for about 5 hours in the last 72 hours. You haven't slept at all. You got to go get some sleep. We're doing everything that we need to from here. Let us take care of this. After a lot of hard pressing on his point, me finally listening to the wisdom that he's given me on this deal, I had gone home to get a couple hours of sleep. And I can remember that Sunday morning, my phone rings and I look over and I realize it's the FBI agent out of Michigan. And I jump up, it's early in the morning and I don't want to wake my wife up. So I run to her closet to answer the call. And I can remember answering that phone call and he says, Derick, we got her. She's safe. And man, just the flood of emotion that came over me of knowing that we had all done our part to get her safe and knowing that there was a lot more to come. But if nothing else, that we had accomplished that was just huge. I called my boss and said, we've got her recovered. And we opted that immediately we were going to throw our clothes on and go to the dad's house and tell him in person. It's one of those that, the conversation needs to be in private. You know that it's early in the morning on Sunday, and there is a flood of emotions when law enforcement knocks at your door any point in time, but especially when your daughter's missing. It's very early in the morning. We knocked on the door and her dad comes to the door and I said, hey, we need to come in and talk. I could just see the panic on his face and getting to go in and tell him that we had recovered his daughter not even an hour before at that point, I don't think, and just watching the relief that he had, knowing that she was at least going to get to come home. That was huge, getting to talk with him about that. And again, we go back to what a great partnership our local agency has with the FBI and the federal partners that we have here in Lubbock. For a local agency the resources to have been able to do what happened in the moments after that would have been done, but I don't know that it would have been done with the swiftness and the speed that it occurred in. But it was hours later that the federal partners and the victim services coordinator had a plane ticket for her dad, and he was on a plane headed to Michigan to pick up his daughter.
Part of my calls to Dallas and headquarters, I was making sure that we had the victim advocacy people there from the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. Being a juvenile and being such a sensitive nature, I knew that they were going to need to pull resources in from that lane as well. Derick said that he went home and got a few hours sleep. I don't remember Derick going home that night. Derick was always there, and we knew he was. I knew John and I typed for a while. I didn't know if Derick was in another office or not. But John and I worked from Friday all the way through Sunday morning on one shift with no sleep. Derick had put his hours in earlier in the week, and to say that there was a lot of man hours put on this case is kind of an understatement.
Derick, is there anything that you want to add to how she was returned? Did her family go to escort her back?
Absolutely. So her daddy got to fly out there and pick her up and was able to bring her back.
That's what I was hoping.
We obviously left that time for them. It was really important for us that she not be interviewed up there, that she get a couple of good nights sleep before anybody was really trying to talk to her about the events that had transpired while she was gone. So they got that opportunity to get there, pick her up and bring her back. And when I talked to the dad after he got back, he told me the hug that she gave me at the sheriff's office when I got there and saw her for the first time was probably one of the biggest and best hugs I've ever gotten. So they make the journey back to Lubbock, and a couple of days after she gets back, we ultimately had her forensically interviewed. That's where we were able to really learn about the abuse that she had suffered at the hands of her abductor while she was gone from Lubbock. And some of those things that we talked about, one of them being her braces that were removed from her. But another thing was, in talking with her, the forensic interviewer was like, what prompted you to go? And we had found some communications where he had made threats against her family too. And ultimately, through all of the psychological torture that she had gone through over the internet, she ultimately felt that it was in the best interest of her family if she were to just go with him, because at least he wouldn't do anything to harm her family. So he had gotten so deep into her psyche that he was able to convince her of that, which ultimately prompted her to go with him. And then she recalled that as soon as they got in the car, they weren't even hardly out of Lubbock when he told her, "I've already dug your grave. And if you're lucky when we get there, I'll show you where it's at." So she went with him fully expecting that she would never see her family again, and she wasn't going to come out of this still alive. So she had a large amount of relief herself when she was recovered, knowing that she was going to get away from that abuse.
And Derick was getting emotional, and this is a case that it's very hard not to get emotional about, because it was a lot of effort in a short amount of time for a very valid and honorable reason. The young lady, the victim in the case, she was rock solid through the process. She interacted well with the victim advocacy people and interacted well with her family. It was an amazing case to be a part of.
At that point in time, she's back home and she's safe and recovered, but that starts the three-ring circus that would become his trial phase. And one of the first things was, most of the time in a case like this, the person's going to waive their detention hearing, just knowing that the court is more than likely going to rule that there are no facts or circumstances that could protect the community in a situation like this that the court could impose. And that's not what happened here. He didn't waive his detention hearing. And so, again, slightly larger than podunk officer turned detective, I am now sitting in a Zoom call testifying in federal court in Michigan for my first time to ever testify in federal court. And I sat on the quote unquote stand. I was in an office in the prosecutor's office, but on the stand in that federal courtroom in Michigan for close to 6 hours going through the communications. We had to read a lot of the communications into the record of what had transpired there. In that process, when it was all said and done, I'm sitting there and I hear the judge tell him, "You're one of the most vile and evil people that's ever been in my courtroom. And I have no choice but to detain you until your trial." And so that's not, he doesn't have his rights still. It's just simply stating that he's going to be detained until the outcome of the trial. And so that starts his second trip ever to Lubbock, Texas, where he gets the white bus ride courtesy of the U.S. Marshal Service back here. And that took several months for him to get here through that process before he could ultimately go through all of his different defense attorneys that him and his family would hire and ultimately fire before he elected to represent himself at trial.
I don't want to get too far ahead of Derick. They had hired an attorney for him out of Michigan. He fired that attorney, so they hired an attorney for him in Lubbock. His family did. These are well-to-do, high-paid attorneys that are very competent, and he fired the attorney in Lubbock too. I think he had a competency hearing next. And at the detention hearing where the judge was reading him his charges and deciding if he would be held for trial or if he would be released on bond, he had attorneys that specialized in Asperger's syndrome, and they use a lot of behaviors that they find are excusable by having Asperger's. During that detention hearing, the judge was looking down momentarily, and the prosecutor said something, and the defendant, not the defendant's attorneys, but the defendant objected, and the judge sustained the objection. And the prosecutor immediately said, "Judge, that objection didn't come from the defense attorneys. That objection came from the defendant himself." The judge asked the defense attorneys if that was the case. They said it was. They went ahead and sustained the objection, but that plays key into the competency hearing because the judge found that if a person can keep track of the legal proceeding that he's not familiar with and know when to object, and that objection actually be sustained, that you kind of have your wits about you and you know when you're doing right and wrong. After the competency hearing, he fired both those attorneys and he decided to represent himself. When he was representing himself, he has a right as a defense attorney to come look at all the evidence and discovery that the FBI has in our files that can be used in the prosecution. So we would have to go pick him up from the jail, bring him to our office, and let him review the material that we had ready for prosecution. In that material, of course, there's lots of images of the victim in this case. There's lots of images and communications with her that we knew that he was looking at the images and he was looking at the communications, not for purposes of defense, but for self-gratification. He spent so much time in there, he even changed the wallpaper on an FBI computer to one of the images that he found pleasurable. This case, over months, wound up going to trial, and it went to trial. He represented himself. The federal judge here assigned a co-counsel to him. And so the co-counsel sat at the table with them, and then I'll let Derick talk a little bit about the trial.
Before you do that, it sounds like there was a decision for this to be charged federally as opposed to state. And I know there are many situations where the FBI is involved and FBI techniques and technology is used, and they still decide to charge it in state. Was that because this was an interstate and it was easier to charge it federally? What was the rationale behind that?
The interstate nexus was a major part of the decision-making, but our Crimes Against Children Task Force, it was very, very aggressive. They were getting more sentencings and convictions than the squad of Dallas agents working the same violation. The prosecutor that was prosecuted in this case is incredibly aggressive and very focused on these types of cases. It was decided that the case would be best served if it stayed in the U.S. Attorney's Office, federally prosecuted and prosecuted by the AUSA Cali Willem.
A lot of the subpoenas and the search warrants were coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Exactly. Yes. I was talking to the criminal chief, who was Cali Willem's boss, through that night and through much of it. But as soon as the case went to prosecution, Cali was assigned the case, and she was very aggressively moving forward with it to make sure that he was detained and held without bond, to make sure that his competency hearing went smoothly and there couldn't be things that were objected to. They even concurred here at the U.S. Attorney's Office that he be assigned a co-counsel by the judge. And so the U.S. Attorney's Office did a fantastic job here in preparation for trial all the way up to trial.
Now, we're talking about the trial. We're talking about him representing himself. I'm just horrified by the thought that she was there testifying and he was there cross-examining her. Did that occur?
It did. Detective Smith was called by the prosecutor, and they had Derick on the stand for quite some time. He cross-examined Derick. He was also able to cross-examine the victim's father. That was very difficult to watch, him cross-examining the father. He was very adversarial towards him. It was something that the judge made him maintain professional decorum, but he was enjoying demeaning the dad and getting into the dad pretty hard. When it came time for the victim to testify, she sat up there, she sat up straight. She had a very focused look on her face. At one point, he made the statement. He said, "You know I love you, and you love me too, don't you?" And without hesitation, she looked right in his eyes and said, "I do not." It was hard not to stand up and clap for her that day, right at that moment. It was absolutely amazing to see. We were proud of her as a law enforcement agency that she was able to stand up like that and take it back to him as hard as he was being on her. In his opening arguments, he said, "We're here because of undisputed facts." We thought that was interesting that he said that because we're like, you just confessed to a jury. But I think that he wanted to represent himself and he wanted to go to trial so he could spend more time around his victim and that he could have the ability to speak to her again.
Sick.
Yes, ma'am. I met Derick the day he called for us to come over. And you can see how, even though we all just met each other, there was no arguing amongst ourselves. There was no egos, no animosity. We each had our part. We each played our role. And that's how this case was worked so efficiently. And that's how it came together. And ultimately, that's how we brought her home.
Beautiful.
And then the trial phase of this was very eye-opening for me because I had a lot of experience testifying in state court, but I had never really been part of a federal investigation at that point in time. And so as we continue to get ready for this trial, it took a couple of years to ultimately get this thing to trial.
And at this point, you are a task force officer, so you have been deputized.
Still not the task force officer during that trial. So I get named the case agent as still a local officer, which in a federal trial means you sit at the prosecution table for the entire duration of the trial, which is very interesting to me.
What did the subject receive as his penalty or punishment for this crime? Was Beaucamp known to law enforcement, and how did that play in his sentencing?
He was not known to law enforcement prior to this event. He came from a well-to-do family. He was educated. He was indicted on 16 counts federally. And the jury convicted him very quickly of all 16 counts. It wasn't one of those cases where you had an overnight or a couple of days of jury deliberation. The jury left. It probably took them as long to read the 16 charges individually as it did for them to just vote on it and come out. It was very, very quick. We were all pleased that we were all reasonably certain that this would be the outcome. We were thrilled to death with the jury and the courtroom and how that responded.
And then we entered into the sentencing phase of the federal trial. And I can remember as soon as the jury came back with the guilty verdict, the first thing that he asked for was, "Your Honor, I think I'd like an attorney at this point." We all thought he was a few days late on asking for that since he had been representing himself this entire time. And so after all the sentencing portion of the federal trial was done, he received a life sentence in the federal system, which life in federal prison is actual life. So for the remainder of his natural life, he will be in a federal detention facility.
And do we have an update on the victim? Have you been in touch with the family? Do you know? I hope she's doing well.
Yes, we do keep up with her. We like to take her out for something around her birthday. So we've gone and gotten ice cream and things like that, where we've gotten a chance to keep up with her over the last couple of years. She is doing amazing. Watching her grow up these last couple of years, where she was versus where she is now, she is doing fantastic in life.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Derick became a task force agent after John left. He did a fantastic job with them there. And so as a VIX investigator, I did his background investigation, and that's where I got to know more about him. I was glad that Derick went over there and had the opportunity to see what the FBI could do and what FBI resources he could bring to bear on other cases.
Thank you both, Phil and Derick, for sharing this case review with us. I know there's a lot of law enforcement officers that listen to this, and maybe there are some that, like you, were not sure about what a partnership with the FBI can bring. And we've taken this time to give them some more, as they say, tools in the toolbox in case they have a runaway turned abduction case like this. So thank you both very much. We've come to the part of the case review where I like to ask my standard question. I'll start with you, Derick, first. When and why did you join law enforcement? And what are you doing now? I believe you're still working?
Yeah. So I grew up playing team sports and was used to a team environment where everybody worked together for a common goal. I thought business and sales would be the right direction to go with that drive in mind, and quickly learned that I didn't like the sales world because people would step over who they called a friend to make a sell. And so I had lots of friends in law enforcement that prompted me to get into the police department. And 2013 is when I got into law enforcement, promoted to detective in 2019. And then in 2021, following this case was very pivotal in my career. And it's when I decided that I wanted to work in the internet crimes against children realm of law enforcement. So I've spent since January of 2021 working in internet crimes against children, and have since had the opportunity to go on and be the task force officer from the Lubbock Police Department to the FBI, getting to work on the Violent Crimes Against Children Task Force.
Well, we're lucky to have you. All right, Phil, it's your turn. I'm going to ask you my standard question. When and why you joined the FBI?
I began working for the police department for a local agency in West Texas in 1989. And during my time there on patrol and in my time as a detective, I worked with the FBI on a few cases. I interacted with them well. Two agents were very encouraging in asking me to apply for the FBI. And then I had a sergeant that was encouraging me to apply to be a federal agent to do better for my family. So in 1994, I applied in January 94, I applied with the FBI, and there was a hiring freeze at the time. And I wound up getting hired in January 1997. The reason I joined the FBI is because as a police officer, I had fun working cases and putting violent people in jail. But I knew that at the FBI, I wouldn't be putting the worst of my town people in jail. I'd be putting the worst criminals in the world in jail. And that's what I wanted. That's why I joined the FBI.
And at the time of this particular case, you were the supervisor of the task force, but you retired shortly after this case that we were talking about. So when did you retire, and what are you doing now?
I retired in January of 2021. My last position was the supervisor for the West Texas resident agencies. What I'm doing now is I'm the administrator for the Texas Anti-Gang Center here in Lubbock, Texas.
I like to give my guest the last word. So, Derick, what would you like to say?
To those investigators that are out there working this caseload, just know that everything you're doing is truly impactful to the victims that we serve, and that just by merely stepping up and taking the job, you're doing the good stuff in law enforcement. And to the victims and families on this caseload, thank you for trusting us when you come to us with your problems, that we can help you come to a justice solution for the violent crimes that have been committed against you.
All right. So now it is your turn, Phil. You're going to have the real last word of this episode. So what would you like to say?
When I began in the FBI, I was assigned to task forces and in offsites through my whole career. Even as I became a supervisor, my job was liaison with local and state and federal agencies or the intelligence community. Coming back to West Texas and being the supervisor for all the programs, I wanted to make sure that every program felt like they were the most important. Doing these types of cases and the people that do these types of cases, I have the utmost respect for and admiration. It takes a certain mindset to do these cases long term, and I have nothing but the most respect for it. And so me participating in a case like this and working side by side with the guys and making sure that we had a successful outcome is what the FBI is supposed to be doing, and I was proud to do my part of that.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find a photo of Phil Partin and Derick Smith, along with case-related articles and images. There's also a link to another FBI retired case file review episode where the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, CAST, assisted in resolving a missing persons case. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, Or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.